The office felt too clean. Ambassador Elias Vale stood at the doorway and looked inside one last time. The walls were bare now. The framed pictures of Earth's oceans, forests, and cities were gone. The books had been packed. The drawers were empty. Even the air in the room felt strange, like it already knew no human would ever return. At the center of the desk sat a single tablet. One word glowed on its screen: enough. Elias stared at it for a moment, then picked up his coat. His hand shook a little, but his face did not. He had cried earlier, alone, where nobody could see. Now there were no tears left, only a deep, heavy silence. Outside, the long embassy hall was dark. One by one, the office lights had already gone out. The human wing of the Galactic Council station was becoming a shadow. No alarms, no speeches, no final protest. Just silence. At the end of the corridor, Lieutenant Mira Sen waited beside the shuttle doors. Her eyes were red, but her back was straight. "Sir," she said softly, "all human stations have confirmed closure. Every embassy, every aid post, every relay team. We are the last." Elias gave a slow nod. For a second, he looked through the station's great glass wall into the stars beyond. 200 years ago, humanity had crossed those stars with hope. They had arrived in council space with open hands and bright hearts. They believed the galaxy would welcome them. At first, it almost looked that way. The Galactic Council had called humanity a promising young species. They were placed at the lowest level, of course, temporary, limited, watched. The old powers said this was normal. Earn your place, they said. Prove your worth. So humanity did. They shared medicine that saved lives on worlds they had never seen before. They built better transit gates and repaired routes between distant systems. They sent teachers, engineers, doctors, and peacekeepers. They stood between enemies and talked them down from war. They helped feed planets during crop collapse. They gave and gave and gave. And every time they asked for one simple thing, a true seat at the table, a vote, a voice. The answer was the same: not yet. Years turned into decades, decades turned into generations. The old powers always had reasons. Humans were too emotional, too short-lived, too unpredictable, too soft. Useful, yes. Equal, no. Elias had heard those words so many times they no longer sounded insulting. They sounded tired, hollow, like old lies repeated until they became tradition. Then came the attack on Haven's Wake. 3 million humans had lived on that outer colony. Families, farmers, children, dreamers. When the raiders came, the colony called for help through every proper council channel. Humanity followed every rule. They filed every request. Elias himself had stood before the chamber and asked for emergency support. Some delegates looked down. Some avoided his eyes. Most simply voted no. Humanity fought alone. They won, but 40,000 civilians died under black smoke and burning skies. Afterward, the council sent condolences. 3 cold sentences. That was the moment something inside humanity stopped asking. Now, standing before the shuttle, Elias finally understood what had replaced the pain. Not rage, not revenge, decision. He stepped inside. Mira followed. The doors sealed with a soft hiss. Outside, the council station remained bright and busy, still pretending nothing important was leaving. The shuttle pulled away without a farewell message. No human ship signaled goodbye. No one begged to be noticed anymore. And far beyond council borders, hidden in the dark between the stars, thousands of human ships were already moving toward a place the galaxy had never bothered to map. This time, humanity was not traveling to join something. They were leaving to build something of their own. But 6 months after the last human ship vanished, the first cracks began to spread across the galaxy, and the Council realized too late that humanity had never been a guest in their world.
6 months after humanity disappeared, the first real panic began. It did not start with war. It started in a hospital. On the world of Lumea, rows of patients lay under white lights while doctors moved faster and faster, trying to hide fear behind calm faces. A fever had spread across the southern continent. It burned through the body in days. The old treatments slowed it, but only one medicine could truly stop it. That medicine had been made by humans. For years, human labs had produced it without asking for praise, payment, or special rights. The Council had accepted it the way it accepted everything else from humanity, easily, casually, like it would never end. Now it had ended. Dr. Sel Varan stood in the supply room and stared at the final case of medicine. 12 glass vials. Only 12. Outside the door, families waited with desperate eyes. Some were praying, some were crying, some just stood there in silence, too tired even for hope. Governor Thalen of Lumea sent an emergency message to the Galactic Council before the sun had fully risen. By evening, he was standing in the chamber himself. "We need immediate contact with the human worlds," he said. His voice shook, but he kept going. "Thousands are already dead. If we wait longer, tens of thousands more will follow. This is not politics anymore. This is mercy." The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then the Drell representative leaned back in his seat and gave a cold shrug. "You built your systems around human generosity," he said. "That was your mistake." A few delegates looked down. A few looked uncomfortable. Most said nothing. The motion failed. Not with anger, not with shouting, just with that same old polished indifference that had pushed humanity away in the first place. Governor Thalen stood frozen for a second after the vote. His mouth opened, then closed again. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked out without another word. But the sickness was only the beginning. 3 weeks later, a relay gate failed in the Kairos corridor. It was one of the gates humans had redesigned years earlier, turning a slow and unstable route into one of the busiest trade paths in the sector. Without warning, the gate went dark. Cargo ships piled up for millions of miles, food shipments spoiled, medical supplies never arrived. Families waited at ports for loved ones who could not come home. The Council sent engineers. They studied the gate for 19 days. They could not fix it. The design was open. Nothing was locked. Nothing was hidden. It was simply beyond them. Then another gate failed, and another. Trade routes bent and broke. Prices rose. Tempers rose faster. Old border grudges, once kept under control by human mediators and human patience, began to wake up again. Then the raiders came. Not in huge numbers at first, just enough to test the edges, just enough to see if the old defenses were still strong. They were not. Human officers had once held mixed fleets together. Human coordinators had once turned proud, stubborn species into working allies. Without them, every commander wanted control. Every fleet wanted to lead. Orders were delayed. Warnings were argued over. Help came late. Colonies burned while meetings continued. And slowly, horribly, a thought began to spread through the council station. This was not a protest. This was not a tantrum. Humanity had not left in anger. Humanity had left with a plan. Late that night, Counselor Sereth of the Valrin stood alone in front of a star map and stared at the dark edge beyond known space. For the first time in her long career, she felt something she could not hide from herself.
Not pride, not certainty, fear. Because the galaxy was starting to understand a terrible truth. Humans had never been the weakest species in the room. They were the ones holding the room together. And when the Council finally sent someone to trace humanity's path into the dark, what she found was far more frightening than revenge.
The ship sent to follow humanity's path was not large. It was fast, silent, and built for deep-range observation. The Council did not want to admit fear yet, so it called the mission a diplomatic survey. But everyone in the command room knew the truth. They were not going to greet humanity. They were going to see what humanity had become. Commander Ilya Wren stood on the bridge as the stars bent into lines outside the viewglass. She was not human, but she had worked beside them for nearly 15 years. She had learned their habits, their strange humor, their stubborn kindness, and the quiet way they carried pain. When the Council gave her this mission, they believed that made her useful. They were right. It also made her uneasy. "Last confirmed human signal?" she asked. Her navigator checked the fading markers on the screen. 17 weeks old. After that, nothing. Ilya folded her arms. Nothing doesn't happen by accident. No one answered. The ship crossed past known trade lanes, then beyond patrol routes, then beyond the outer beacons where maps turned thin and uncertain. This was the kind of space most species avoided. Too dark, too empty, too quiet. Humans had gone there on purpose. For 9 days, the crew found almost nothing. Then, on the 10th day, they found the first sign. A warning buoy. It floated alone in black space, turning slowly, its outer shell marked in dozens of languages. Some were common trade dialects, some were ancient, some had not been used in centuries. Commander Ilya stepped closer as the buoy transmitted the same message again and again. Unregistered vessels proceed no farther. This region is under human protection. Turn back. The bridge fell silent. Protection. Not territory, not conquest. Protection. "Scan for weapons," Ilya said. The crew obeyed instantly. What they found made the blood drain from every face on the bridge. There were defense platforms hidden in the dark around them. Not one or two, hundreds, cold and waiting. Their signatures were clean, efficient, and far beyond what the Council thought humanity could build in such a short time. No loose power waste, no unstable heat trails, no weak points easy to read. These were not desperate defenses made by a wounded species. These were the walls of something planned long ago. "Commander," the sensor officer whispered, "there's more." A map spread across the main display. Human ships, mining stations, shield arrays, habitat rings, supply routes, energy networks. It was not a refugee fleet. It was a civilization already standing. And at the center of it all, wrapped around the light of a pale blue star, was a structure so large that for a second no one on the bridge understood what they were seeing. Then they did. A shipyard. A living, working shipyard on the scale the Council had never attempted. Ilya stared at it and suddenly remembered something a human engineer once told her over a late-night meal. "We always build backups," he had said with a tired smile, "because one day someone will fail us, and when that day comes, we'd rather be ready than surprised." At the time, she had laughed. Now she felt cold. Humanity had not fled into darkness in panic. Humanity had returned to a second home already waiting for them. And the galaxy, proud and blind, had never noticed. A signal flashed on the screen. Incoming transmission. Human origin. The crew froze. Ilya gave the order to open it. The face that appeared was calm, older, and painfully familiar. Ambassador Elias Vale. But there was nothing diplomatic left in his eyes. Then Elias spoke only one sentence, and the meaning behind it told Commander Ilya that the galaxy's worst days had not even begun.
Elias Vale looked straight into the bridge camera. His face was calm, but it was not the calm of peace. It was the calm of someone who had already buried his hope and learned how to live without it. Then he spoke. "Go back," he said. "Tell your council humanity is no longer waiting to be wanted." That was all. One sentence. Simple, clean, final. The screen went dark. For a long moment, nobody on Commander Ilya Wren's bridge moved. The warning lights from the hidden defense platforms still blinked softly around them, and the great human shipyard turned in silence beyond the glass, bright as a second sunrise in the black. Ilya kept staring at the dead screen. She had expected anger, maybe a threat, maybe a list of demands. Instead, Ilyas had given them something worse, a truth with no room left in it. "We should leave," her navigator whispered. Ilya did not answer at once. Her eyes moved over the sensor feeds again. New stations under construction, patrol lines moving with perfect timing, cargo routes, shield nets, colony signatures farther out than the first scans had shown. Humanity had not been hiding in fear. Humanity had been preparing for life after disappointment. And they were doing well. Too well. At last, Ilya gave the order to turn back. No one argued. The return trip felt longer than the journey out. On the way there, the crew had been full of guesses. On the way back, nobody guessed anything. They sat in silence, each carrying the same heavy thought in a different shape. When they finally arrived at Council Space, the news waiting for them was worse. Another relay chain had failed along the eastern routes. A grain convoy bound for 5 hungry moons had been stranded so long that most of its cargo had spoiled in transit. 2 border stations had fallen after their defense fleets broke formation during the first hour of battle. And on the world of Selvin, riots had broken out after translation errors turned a food ration notice into what sounded like a threat of seizure. By the time the mistake was understood, 17 people were dead. The galaxy was not just struggling now, it was unraveling. Ilya went straight from the dock to the council chamber. The great hall was full, but the old confidence was gone. No polished pride, no bored faces pretending the crisis would pass. Fear had entered the room at last, and fear looked ugly on people who had spent centuries acting untouchable. Counselor Sereth gave her report without drama. She described the warning buoy, the hidden weapons, the colonies beyond the rim, the shipyard, the scale of the human expansion. Then she repeated Ilyas's exact words. A murmur rolled through the chamber like cold wind. Some delegates looked stunned. Some looked ashamed. Garath of the Drell slammed one heavy hand onto his desk. "Then we force them back," he growled. "No species walks away from the galaxy and denies the council." Ilya turned to look at him. For the first time in years, she did not soften her voice. "You did not see what I saw," she said. "That was not a wounded people hiding in the dark. That was a civilization that has already replaced us in its future." The room went still. Even Garath did not answer. And up in the high silver seats, the oldest counselors finally began to understand what their pride had cost them. Humanity had not closed a gate behind them. They had closed a chapter. But before the council could decide whether to beg, threaten, or kneel, a new disaster struck at the heart of the galaxy, and this time millions would hear the silence left by humanity all at once. The disaster began during an apology. That was the cruel part. The council chamber was full for the emergency session. Delegates packed the long silver rows. Observers filled the upper galleries. Outside the station, millions watched through public broadcasts from core worlds across the galaxy. For the first time in years, the Council was about to say out loud what it had avoided for too long. They had failed. Counselor Sereth stood at her podium with both hands resting on the cold glass. She was not ready, but the galaxy was burning, and ready no longer mattered. "We cannot continue like this," she said. "The border is collapsing, trade is failing, our people are dying. We must decide whether pride is more important than survival." No one laughed. No one interrupted. Even the Drow war bloc stayed quiet, though their silence looked more like anger than wisdom. On the lower tier, a young Peleth delegate named Kiora rose slowly to support the motion. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger with each word. "We did not lose humanity," she said. "We pushed them away, and now we are living inside the empty place they left behind." A few heads bowed. A few looked away. And then the translation system failed. At first it was small. One sentence came through wrong, then another. Kiora's words, meant as sorrow, reached the Drell benches as accusation. A calm response from a Valran elder came out sounding like mockery. Across the chamber, voices sharpened. Delegates who had just begun to listen were suddenly hearing insults that had never been spoken. "Check the matrix," Sereth snapped. Technicians ran to their consoles. Too late. The system broke wider. Public channels glitched across 1,000 worlds. News anchors froze mid-sentence as their feeds filled with broken language. Trade negotiations became shouting matches. Medical instructions arrived twisted and dangerous. Docking control on Nexus Primus sent the wrong approach orders to incoming traffic. Then the collision happened. Everyone in the chamber felt it. A deep metal shudder rolled through the station floor. Somewhere beyond the council ring, warning sirens began to scream. The central docking spine, one of the busiest ports in galactic space, had just taken a chain impact from 3 cargo carriers trying to obey conflicting commands. The chamber lights flickered. A child in the upper gallery started crying. For 1 second, the whole room sat frozen in fear. Then panic hit. Delegates shouted over each other, but most of them could no longer understand what anyone was saying. Some tried to leave, some demanded security, some thought they were under attack. On the public screens, the same chaos was spreading from world to world. Language itself was turning into smoke. Sereth looked around the chamber and felt cold truth settle deep in her bones. Humans had not only built roads between stars, they had built the words that crossed those roads, and now those words were dying too. A security officer rushed to her side. "Docking spine breach, fires in 4 sections, thousands trapped in transit." Sereth turned toward the emergency channel. "Send rescue teams." The officer hesitated. "From where?" he asked. That was the question. Because the best emergency coordination teams had once been human. The best cross-species triage crews had once been human. The best crisis translators had once been human. And now, at the very heart of the galaxy, millions were about to learn what silence really cost. Sereth closed her eyes for 1 brief second. When she opened them, she was no longer afraid of looking weak. She was afraid of being too late. But as rescue ships rushed toward the burning docking spine, one unknown vessel entered the station's shattered traffic zone, and its signal carried a human code nobody had heard in years.
The unknown vessel entered the broken traffic zone without fear. All around Nexus Primus, warning lights flashed red across the wrecked docking lanes. Fires burned along the outer spine. Cargo containers drifted loose in space. Rescue crews were shouting over dead channels, and half the station could no longer understand the other half. Then the new signal appeared. old human emergency code. For 1 second, nobody moved. On the command deck, Sarath stared at the screen as if she was afraid it might disappear. The code was real, clean, recognized by every old rescue archive still left in the system. A human ship. But it was not a warship. It was long, white, and plain, with no heavy weapons showing on scan. Its hull carried marks from hard travel, but its movement was steady and exact. It did not hesitate at the edge of danger. It went straight into the burning traffic field, where other pilots were too afraid to enter. A voice came over the emergency band. Calm, human, female. All vessels hold position, cut active thrust, follow beacon guidance only. Medical corridors are now being established. No threat, no lecture, no anger, just orders. And somehow everyone obeyed. Small lights launched from the human ship in perfect lines, spreading through the wreckage like stars being placed by hand. Ships that had been drifting toward collision suddenly turned away. Escape pods lost in smoke and heat suddenly appeared on new tracking grids. Broken channels cleared one by one as the human vessel pushed a simple override patch through the old emergency network. Within minutes, the panic began to change shape. It was still fear, but now it had direction. Sarath ran to the outer command balcony and watched through the glass as human drones cut through burning hull plates, pulling trapped civilians from ruptured sections. A cargo hauler split open near Dock Ring 4, and for one terrible second, she thought everyone inside was gone. Then, the human ship opened its lower bay. Rows of rescue craft poured out. Not soldiers, not fighters. Rescue teams. The kind the galaxy had once trusted more than anyone. Around her, officers stood frozen in shame and relief. Some were crying openly now, not because they were weak, but because they had reached the edge of disaster and found help from the very people they had failed. An officer at the console turned toward Sarath. His voice shook. "They're prioritizing children first," he said. Of course they were. Hours later, the fires were finally under control. The death toll was still terrible, thousands injured, hundreds gone, but it could have been far worse. Everyone on the station knew that. Everyone knew exactly who had stopped the disaster from becoming a graveyard. The human ship never docked. It stayed just beyond the shattered traffic line, quiet and distant. At last, Sarath opened a direct channel. "This is Counselor Sarath of the Galactic Council," she said carefully. "To the captain of the rescue vessel, thank you." There was a pause. Then the same calm voice answered. "This assistance was given to civilians in immediate danger. It is not a renewal of relations." The words hit harder than any insult. Not cruel, not cold, simply clear. Sarath swallowed. "May we speak?" Another pause. Then, "You may send one representative." The bridge went silent. Sarath felt every eye turn toward her. Beyond the glass, the white human ship floated in the darkness like a memory the galaxy had not earned back. And for the first time, the Council was not being invited to negotiate. It was being allowed to approach. But when Sarath finally stepped aboard the human vessel, the first thing she saw was not anger, not blame, but a wall of names that made her understand just how deep humanity's silence truly went.
The first thing Sarath saw when the airlock opened was a wall of light. At first, she thought it was a star map. Then she stepped closer and realized it was made of names. Thousands of them. Lines and lines of quiet silver letters glowing against a dark glass panel, stretching from the floor to the ceiling. Some names were old, some were recent, some had small dates beside them. Others had only one word under them:
Home. Memory. Lost. Sareth stopped walking. No one on the human ship rushed her. No one told her to move. The two officers guiding her simply stood back and let the silence do its work. Her eyes moved across the glowing wall until they found a section marked with a simple heading, "For the 40,000." Her chest tightened. Air in reach, Haven's wake, different name, same wound, the colony, the dead, the vote that never came, the moment the Council had measured human lives and decided they were not worth the trouble. Sareth lifted one trembling hand, but she did not touch the glass. A woman's voice came from behind her. "We keep them where we can see them." Sareth turned. The speaker was human, perhaps in her late 50s, with tired eyes and a calm face. She wore no military marks, no heavy symbols of rank, just a dark coat and a silver pin in the shape of a small tree. "I'm Director Lena Okafor," she said. "You asked to speak. Come with me." Sareth followed her through a quiet corridor lined with windows. Outside, human ships moved in smooth lines through the dark, steady and unhurried. Nobody here looked afraid. Nobody looked lost. That somehow made everything hurt more. They entered a simple room with a wide table, 2 chairs, and a window looking out over a ring habitat filled with gardens and sunlight. A place built in exile, yet brighter than the Council's proud halls had ever felt. Okafor sat first. Sareth remained standing for a moment. "I came to thank you," she said at last, "for the station, for the civilians." Okafor gave a small nod. "We helped the dying. That is not the same as returning." The words were gentle, but they did not bend. Sareth sat down slowly. "Then tell me what this is," she asked. "Mercy? Distance? Judgment?" Okafor looked out the window before answering. "It is a boundary, one we should have built sooner." Sareth said nothing. Okafor folded her hands. "Your council always believed we left because we were angry. That is only partly true. Anger burns fast. It cannot carry a people across the dark. What carried us was something else." She met Sareth's eyes. "We finally understood that being needed is not the same as being valued." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into deep water. "For 2 centuries, Okafor continued, we healed worlds, repaired roads between stars, fed colonies, settled wars, trained fleets, translated languages, and buried our dead quietly so no one would feel guilty for stepping over them. We kept hoping that if we gave enough, someone would one day say we belonged. In the end, we stopped asking." Sareth lowered her gaze. "We did not leave because we hated the galaxy," Okafor said softly. "We left because we still loved ourselves." Those words hurt more than blame ever could. Sareth looked back toward the corridor, toward that wall of names glowing in silence. "And now?" she asked. Okafor leaned back in her chair. "Now our parliament decides whether your people will be allowed into our future at all." Sareth felt the air leave her lungs. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to stand before a door and realize she had never noticed it was closing. But before Sareth could answer, the lights in the room shifted, and a live message from the human parliament revealed that humanity itself was divided on whether the galaxy deserved even one more chance.
The lights in the room dimmed for just a second. Then the wall screen came alive. A live feed from the Terran Parliament filled the quiet space. Row after row of human delegates sat beneath a high glass ceiling, their faces serious, tired, and fully awake to the weight of what they were deciding. Sarath stood still beside the table. Lena Okafor did not speak. She only folded her hands and watched. This was not a small meeting. This was a people deciding what to do with pain. The debate had already been going on for days.
Sarath knew that much. She had spent those days walking through New Geneva, trying to understand how a species could build something so warm after leaving so much cold behind. She had seen schools, gardens, workshops, hospitals, and quiet streets full of ordinary life, but now she was seeing the heart of it, and the heart was divided. One speaker rose, a young woman with tired eyes and a voice that shook only once. "My mother died at Haven Ridge," she said. "I know what was taken from us. I know what kind of silence followed. But I also know who she was. She helped people because it was right, not because they had earned it." The chamber listened. Then another delegate stood. He was older. His face looked worn down by years of service and disappointment. "We have already given enough," he said. "We were used when we were needed and ignored when we were hurting. Now the galaxy is desperate, and suddenly we matter. That is not respect. That is fear wearing polite clothes." Sarath lowered her eyes, because he was right. More voices followed. Some wanted to reopen the door. Some wanted it locked forever. Some spoke with anger. Some with sorrow. None spoke lightly. At last, Lena Okafor rose. The entire chamber became still. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she looked across the room, and her voice came soft and clear. "We did not leave to punish the galaxy," she said. "We left to save ourselves." No one moved. "And we succeeded," she went on. "We built a home. We built peace. We built a future where no one has to beg to be treated like a person. But beyond our borders, there are still billions who are suffering under a system they did not create." Her eyes sharpened. "If we close our doors now, if we watch them die simply because the Council failed us, then we become what wounded us." The silence after that was deep, not empty, deep. Sarath felt her throat tighten, because those words did not sound like weakness. They sounded like strength that had survived grief. The vote happened the next morning. Sarath watched from her apartment window as dawn touched the towers of New Geneva with gold. Then she turned to the screen and sat without moving, her hands pressed tightly together. The result came at once. Humanity would not return to the Galactic Council, but humanity would not turn away either. A new policy appeared on the chamber screen. The framework of equal partnership. No more pleading for rank, no more class levels, no more borrowed worth. Any species that wished to work with humanity could do so directly, through trade, medicine, science, defense, and aid, but only as equals. No throne, no ladder, no chain, just open hands on level ground. Hours later, Okafor met Sarath again in the same simple room. She placed the formal terms on the table. Then she added one more thing, a crystal, no bigger than a fist, glowing softly from within. Sarath stared at it. Okafor's face did not change. "In this," she said, "are cures, relay designs, farm systems, and everything your people once needed from us." Sarath looked up slowly, and then Okafor gave her the line that would follow her all the way back to the Council. "We were never the ones who kept knowledge to ourselves." But when Sarath returned to the Council, carrying humanity's answer in her hands, the one person no one expected to break the silence was the very woman who had helped create it. For a long second, nobody in the Council chamber moved. Sarath was still standing at the central podium, the crystal resting in front of her like a small captured star. Its pale light shone across the chamber floor and touched the faces of delegates who suddenly looked older than they had only moments before. Then someone rose. Not from the younger delegates, not from the Reform Coalition, from the highest silver tier. Councillor Ithera stood slowly, and the whole chamber seemed to tighten around her. She had ruled through calm words and colder silence for longer than most people in that room had been alive. She was one of the architects of the old order, one of the voices who had always spoken about humanity as useful,
but never equal. One of the people who had helped turn respect into delay and delay into habit. Now she was walking toward the podium. No guard stopped her. No one spoke. Even Gorath of the Drell stayed still, though his jaw tightened with open anger. Ithera stopped beside Serath. For a brief moment, the older woman looked down at the crystal. Then she reached into her robe and pulled out a thin black data slate. Serath's breath caught. She recognized it at once. The tablet left on the human desk, the one with only a single word on it: enough. Ithera lifted it so the whole chamber could see. When the humans left, she said, and her voice was quieter than anyone expected, I told this council they would return. I said they needed us more than we needed them. She paused. I was wrong. The words hit the chamber harder than a shouted confession ever could. Some delegates stared in disbelief. Some lowered their heads. Serath did not move. Ithera looked across the room, not like a ruler now, but like a woman who had finally grown tired of carrying her own lies. The worst part, she said, is that I knew I was wrong even then. The chamber went so silent that even the soft hum of the station could be heard under the floor. I knew what humanity was worth. I knew what we were losing. I saw their service, their patience, their dead. I saw all of it. Her fingers tightened around the slate. But pride is a terrible thing. It does not only blind you, it teaches you how to defend your blindness. Her voice shook once, only once. Then she held up the slate higher. This is what their ambassador left behind. Not a threat, not a speech, not a curse. One word. Enough. Her eyes hardened with grief. Enough. No one dared interrupt. After 2 centuries of giving, after decades of asking for dignity, after burying their people while we measured procedure and saved our comfort, they said enough, and they were right. At that, something changed in the chamber. Not politics, not yet. Something deeper. Shame at last had found a voice. Gorath surged to his feet. This is surrender, he roared. You would humiliate the council before a lesser species. But this time his words did not lead the room. They drowned in it. Delegates were already rising around him, not in anger, in decision. Motions began to fly across the chamber. Emergency reforms, contact protocols, recognition terms, coalition votes. The old structure did not collapse in one blow. It began to crack in public. Serath stood beside Ithera and realized she was watching the first honest moment the council had shown in generations. It was late, painfully late, but not too late for a beginning. And somewhere beyond the chamber walls, beyond pride and rank and old fear, the future was already waiting to see whether the galaxy truly meant what it was finally ready to say. But real change would not be tested in speeches or votes. It would be tested 6 months later, when the first summit on human soil brought old enemies, grieving survivors, and hopeful children under the same sky.
The memorial park was quiet, but it was not empty. That was what struck Serath most. It was a place built from grief, yet life moved gently through it. Wind passed through the leaves. Sunlight rested on the grass. Soft voices rose and faded between the rows of trees. It did not feel like a graveyard. It felt like memory had been given roots. Serath stood beside Lena Okafor and looked down the long paths between the trees. Each one carried a name. Each one had been planted for someone who should have lived longer, laughed more, seen more stars. 40,000 lives. 40,000 small pieces of a world that had been broken. And still, children were playing there. A human boy ran past with a Pelith girl beside him, both laughing so hard they could barely stay on their feet. Behind them, 2 smaller children argued over a bright flying toy that kept dipping into the grass.
A little farther off, a Drell child sat cross-legged near one of the trees, while a human girl carefully showed him how to fold paper into the shape of a bird. Sarath watched them with a strange ache in her chest. "They are not afraid of each other," she said softly. Okafor's expression warmed. "Children usually have to be taught that." Sarath let those words settle. Not far away, the summit delegates were still moving through the park in small groups. Some stopped to read the metal nameplates, some bowed their heads, some simply stood in silence, as if they understood that talking too much here would only make the moment smaller. For the first time in many years, Sarath did not feel like she was standing between two sides. She felt like she was standing at the beginning of something fragile, something living. A Marathi delegate approached one of the trees and placed a small ribbon of blue cloth around its trunk. He did it with both hands, very carefully, as if afraid to do it wrong. Sarath recognized him, Counselor Thinar. His people had nearly been destroyed by the plague after humanity left. He had once begged the council to call the humans back. No one had listened then. Now he stood beneath a human tree with tears in his eyes. Okafor saw him too. "He asked this morning if he could leave one on every 10th tree," she said. "He said his people wanted to honor the dead with music and color." Sarath looked at her. "And what did you say?" Okafor gave a small smile. "I said yes." That simple answer hit harder than grand speeches ever had. Yes, permission to remember, permission to care, permission to step closer. A breeze moved through the branches overhead. The leaves answered in a soft whisper, like many quiet voices speaking at once. Sarath closed her eyes for just a second. She thought of the council chamber, of pride, of silence, of all the years wasted by people who could have chosen better and did not. Then she opened her eyes again and looked at the children. Maybe this was how healing started. Not with a perfect apology, not with one vote, not with one summit. Maybe it started like this, with people choosing, one small moment at a time, not to repeat what had broken them. Behind them, footsteps sounded on the path. A summit aide came quickly, but stopped before reaching the trees, as if even urgency had to lower its voice here. He bowed his head toward Okafor and Sarath. "Director," he said, breathing hard, "a late delegation has arrived through the western gate." Okafor's face changed slightly. "From where?" The aide swallowed. "Dreth Concordance." Sarath felt the warmth leave the air. Because some wounds opened slowly, and some walked back into your life under their own power. But when the first Dreth envoy stepped into the memorial park, nobody expected the one thing he carried in his hands.
No one spoke as the Dreth delegation entered the memorial park. The laughter of children faded into a softer hush. Delegates along the stone paths turned to look. Even the wind seemed to slow between the rows of trees. Sarath felt her shoulders tighten. For years, the Dreth had stood for everything that had wounded humanity. Pride, force, contempt. They had mocked music, kindness, gardens, and grief. They had called service weakness and mercy waste. And now, they were here. The first Dreth envoy walked forward alone. He was tall, broad, and scarred, with dark bronze scales that caught the afternoon light like old metal. But he wore no armor, no war cloak, no blade at his side. Only a plain black sash across his chest, the color of mourning among many species. And in his hands he carried something small. At first, Sarah thought it was just a box. Then he came closer, and she saw that it was made of clear crystal. Inside it rested a young tree sapling, no taller than a human child's arm, its leaves deep red with silver veins running through them like tiny rivers of light. A Dreth world tree. People stared in silence. Director Okafor stepped forward, calm but watchful. "You came late," she said. The envoy lowered his head. "Not much, just enough to be seen." "Yes," he answered. His voice was rough, but there was no threat in it now. "We have been late for a very long time." That line moved through the park like a quiet shock. Sareth looked around and saw faces changing, not forgiving, not yet, but listening. The envoy stepped beside one of the memorial trees and held out the crystal box with both hands. "This sapling comes from our oldest valley," he said. "It is planted only for the dead we cannot repay." No one moved. Okafor's eyes stayed on him. "And who do you believe you owe?" The Dreth looked at the names around him. 40,000 trees, 40,000 losses, 40,000 reasons humanity had walked away. Then slowly he answered, "More than the dead." His voice grew lower. "We owe the living who carried this pain. We owe the children who grew up without those who should have come home. We owe a people we called weak because we were too small to understand their strength." Sareth felt her throat tighten, because this was not a polished speech from a chamber floor. This sounded hard, earned, real. The envoy turned, and for the first time, some noticed a smaller figure standing behind the Dreth delegation, a child, young, quiet, holding a folded strip of dark cloth. The child stepped forward with shaking hands and tied the cloth gently around one of the memorial branches, just like Counselor Thenar had done earlier with the blue ribbon. Only this ribbon carried a single stitched word in the human trade tongue: "Remember." A human mother nearby began to cry quietly. Okafor looked at the child, then back at the envoy. "Who sent you?" The Dreth envoy took one slow breath. "Gorath is dead," he said. The park went still. "He died 3 weeks ago on the border, fighting the same raiders he once said were not worth fearing. Before he died, he recorded one final order." The envoy's grip tightened around the crystal box. "He told us to come here unarmed, to bring life, not symbols, and to say what he understood too late." Okafor's face did not soften, but something deeper moved behind her eyes. And what was that? The Dreth lowered his head again. "That strength without honor is only another kind of cowardice." No one answered for a long moment. Then Okafor stepped forward and placed her hands around the crystal box. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, but not rejection either. Just the first small bridge. And sometimes, after enough graves, a bridge was everything. But the next morning, when humans, Dreth, and council delegates gathered to plant the red sapling together, a message arrived from the outer border that would decide what the new galaxy would become.
The message from the outer border reached the memorial park just after sunrise. The red Dreth sapling was still waiting beside the open patch of earth. Human children stood with small shovels nearby. Alien delegates gathered in quiet groups. The air still carried that gentle feeling of remembrance. Then the signal came. A border convoy had been trapped near the Kareth line. Not a war fleet, a civilian convoy, supply carriers, medical ships, refugee transports. Thousands of lives caught between broken defense lines and a fast-moving scythe attack force. The old council patrols were too far away. The nearest fleets were scattered. If help did not come soon, the convoy would be destroyed. For one sharp second, nobody spoke. Then Director Okafor looked at Sarath, not like an enemy, not even like a guest, like an equal standing at a door that was finally open. "Can your people follow a shared command?" she asked. Sarath understood the real question at once. No rank, no old hierarchy, no one forced beneath another. only trust or failure. She drew in a slow breath. Yes, she said, if they understand, this is the only future left worth having. The Dreth envoy stepped forward next. The black mourning sash still crossed his chest. The Dreth ships at the border will accept joint coordination, he said. His deep voice was steady, under equal terms. That mattered. It mattered more than any speech in any chamber, because the old galaxy had always broken on that exact point. Pride, control, the need to stand above instead of beside. Okafor gave her orders quickly. Human command ships began to move through the wormhole net. Council fleets received open tactical data, not as commands from above, but as shared planning grids. The Dreth assault wings took the front. Peleth support craft moved to shield the civilian lanes. Valrin and Marath medical ships prepared for mass rescue. And for the first time in a long, long while, nobody wasted precious minutes arguing about who deserved to lead. They just moved. The battle did not last long, not because the Scythe were weak, because this time the people facing them were finally acting like they belonged to the same future. Human pilots broke the enemy formation. Dreth heavy ships hit the gap without hesitation. Council rescue teams pulled civilians out in steady streams. And when it was over, the convoy still lived. Not untouched, not whole, but alive. By nightfall, the first reports returned to New Geneva. Children safe, refugees delivered, medical ships intact, Scythe forces retreating. The memorial park stayed quiet for a while after the news was read aloud. Some cried softly, some laughed from pure relief, some simply closed their eyes and let the moment pass through them. Then Director Okafor picked up a shovel. Without a word, she handed another one to Sarath. Together, they lowered the red Dreth sapling into the earth beside the human trees. The Dreth child stepped forward and pressed soil around its roots with both small hands. A human girl beside him did the same. Then another child joined, then another. Soon the adults were kneeling too. Humans, Dreth, council delegates, survivors, former enemies, hands in the same soil. When it was done, everyone stepped back. The new tree stood small among the older ones, but it stood. Sarath looked at the forest of names, at the children, at the woman beside her, and at the sky stretching wide above a changed galaxy. At last, she understood something simple and deep. Humanity had never wanted to rule the stars. They had only wanted to stand in them without bowing. And in the end, that was what taught the galaxy how to rise. The wind moved softly through the memorial trees. No one rushed to speak. No one needed to. This time, the silence was not empty. It was healing. It was respect. And at long last, it sounded like peace. May this message strengthen your faith and renew your hope. Thank you for staying until the end. If this touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Astro Realms for more uplifting content. May God's blessings overflow in your life. See you soon.